This patch is a big one, with changes to top meta decks, nerfs to extremely interesting and important cards, and buffs to some cards that frankly really needed it. Starting with Human Torch getting nerfed to 3-2, a nerf that I think is honestly a little bit late, but it's always a little bit hard to talk about move decks because they are so specifically dominant with players who know what they're doing and have put a lot of time into the game, which makes them a bit of a challenge for people to balance, I think. They have a skill curve that is pretty stark and pretty strong. The better you are, not just at Marvel Snap, but at this specific deck, the better you're going to be at getting all the output out of it. This is true because move utilizes not just the move mechanic, but it utilizes both on reveals and activates in ways that really reward you for saving your usage of these cards for long enough or as long as possible to get maximum value out of it. So it's not just a mechanically intensive deck. It's not just a read intensive deck. It is also a domain specific knowledge intensive deck. And that feeds into the other two, which I think is a long way of saying I'm very grateful they decided to pull the trigger on this, because move had sort of forced the other combo decks out of the metagame just by virtue of if you're both playing combo decks and neither of you interacts with each other. Combo here being used to refer to any deck that doesn't really play any meaningful interaction or disruption and is instead just relying on its own points output. You get gapped by Human Torch pretty easily, where the rest of the deck simply doesn't gap you in that way. The fact that move was able to sort of meld the best scaler in the game, which is basically saying the best combo output in the game, with a deck that still plays Cosmo and Juggernaut for mid-range matchups, is a very, very powerful thing. I don't even know if this is enough to do away with move, but I do know that this chops a lot off of the ceiling, and I mean a lot, because in conjunction with the Sparky nerf last time, there are now simply not going to be Human Torches getting to like 80 power. I find it very unlikely that you will be wanting to do that. You will instead be scraping together a 32, a 40 power Human Torch. You can still do some big ones, but we are at the point of scaling where it is probably less advisable to get it above 40 because you are going to want to use those moves for other things. Likely still going to be a good card. Grateful they took the swing. Worried that this kind of obliterates move at the lower levels of play, which I'm not sure having move be good at the lower levels of play is a goal they should have. Sort of a reverse Doom 2099 thing, where Doom 2099 is much better at lower levels of play because it asks nothing of you. So whenever it's good enough for people to play at high infinite, it's really good in rank 70. It's kind of the opposite dynamic going on here. They're presenting opposite problems. I'm grateful that they took a swing at Human Torch. I'm not convinced it actually gets rid of the deck at high levels. I am convinced it does meaningful damage to it everywhere else. War Machine to 5-9, I think this is pretty clearly an aim at some very specific things, but as much as this looks like a nerf, you know, it makes the Storm War Machine Legion thing not work, I think it's a buff to War Machine in basically every fair deck. One of the things that you do with this card when you're playing fair is use it after an Electro, and this is a really good thing in concert with the new 3-5 Electro, right? Like you do this on with your 5 energy instead of 4. One of the really awkward things about playing War Machine and Electro decks was you'd play Electro, you'd have this extra energy, but in order to use that extra energy and get access to playing multiple cards a turn back, you would have to play a 4-cost card, which takes you off of the extra energy. Now, in those decks, Electro into War Machine is just actively an amazing curve. You're very happy with it. This is a buff to Chamber. Chamber is currently in an Electro War Machine deck. It will probably still be in Electro War Machine decks. And I think this is actually more of a buff than you think when you look at it, because the decks that actually play War Machine and aren't doing the Legion combo, want to be clear about that, are always or almost always playing Electro. Couple of places where this isn't a buff. It's not a buff in the Pixie version of the Infinite deck. If you're familiar with that one, I've highlighted it a couple times on this channel. That really wants it to be a 4. So it is a nerf there. It is a nerf in War Machine Legion decks. It is a buff in Electro decks. If you asked me, which of these do we want to make cards better for and which of these do we want to make cards worse for, I would say they did the right thing. I would much rather War Machine be played in fair Electro decks than in either dump a billion power final turn of the game or your opponent can't play cards final turn of the game. I think it's a much better play pattern for this card to incentivize, and I think on the whole that I am very happy with this change. Almost power agnostic, just based on the profile of the decks it makes better and the decks it makes worse. Elsa Bloodstone to 3-5. We have not been in an Elsa Bloodstone meta for basically forever. At 3-5, I think she is very much worth looking at again, which is really, really good because Elsa Bloodstone is a harbinger of old Snap, back when things were able to scale reasonably and that could be enough. They didn't have to scale multiplicatively. When you look at the decks that are good, a lot of them are multiplicative scalers, right? You have V-Hand, which scales with itself, and that's a core part of what the deck is doing. Human Torch, obviously a multiplicative scaler. Deadpool, multiplicative scaler, even if you want to argue Destroy is not a big deck. I think that you could also take a look at a lot of things in this metagame and say multiplicative scaling, that's a deal. That's a really important thing. What that means is that to do linear scaling, like what Elsa is doing, you're probably going to want to have more power in the base comparatively, and I think that that's a pretty reasonable thing to do. I am not going to say that this is going to be good, though, and I think that's sort of indicative of just where the metagame is at rather than anything else. I think this is nice, though, in a world where something like Chamber is coming out, or not Chamber, Maverick, sorry. The one-word name's getting me mixed up today. In a world where Maverick is coming out, we might be looking at, like, alt kind of surfery things. Getting extra power on your stuff is pretty useful. I do think that this is a buff that needed to happen. What I don't know is if it's enough to make Elsa viable again, but that's not Elsa's fault, right? Like, there are metagames where this would have definitely been a good card. I just don't know that we're in one right now. We're in a very ceiling and floor type meta where the defining cards in terms of tech are Deafening Chord and Shadow King, and the defining decks are things that go really, really tall. And Elsa's not good in any of those contexts. Gets deafening chorded, output gets eaten by Shadow King, not big enough to go big enough. Really interesting change to Morgan Le Fay, going to 3/4 same ability. I don't know if this is a buff or a nerf. I like the idea of being able to pair a Carnage with her. I like the idea of maybe in the future being able to pair a the thing that throws a guy at somebody else, fastball special, with her. I don't know exactly if this is enough to make it like, okay, I'm super in on Morgan Le Fay. I'm the happiest Morgan Le Fay gamer of all time. Love that Morgan Le Fay. I'm a little suspicious of the idea that I would be doing that. I also think that I did enjoy the 4/7 body, and if I look at this card, I guess the thing that really sticks out to me is I think it's still too low in terms of power. We just saw Elsa Bloodstone up to 3/5, and this is a card that I look at it and I'm like, I don't know why that can't be a 3/5 in this context. In fact, I think it should be a 3/5 in this context. I am a little concerned that some of the decks seem to be built around air walkering with Morgan Le Fay. That's not great either because it takes away from the consistency of the deck. In fact, I would argue what Morgan Le Fay decks want is a better way to have Morgan Le Fay 2. What they want is a second copy of that effect more than anything else. This probably takes them off of that in terms of consistency, and I think that, not that Morgan Le Fay decks were particularly viable or anything, but I think that does sort of recontextualize what she's supposed to be. Maybe she is less of a, I am a Morgan Le Fay deck, and at 3 cost, you throw her in your deck that is doing Weapon X stuff, maybe. Like, maybe this goes in the V-Hand Moonstone deck. Not Moonstone, V-Hand Moon Girl deck. I don't know. I do think it's really interesting to experiment with a cheaper version of this card. Like, I almost, like, talking about it kind of makes me wonder if, like, what if it was 2? But I think that this takes her away from being the star in her own decks and starts asking a couple of different questions like, can I do this to supplement something else I'm already doing? Is this a viable way of getting things into my hand with some power? Is this cheap enough now that I can pair it with V-Hand? That kind of thing, I think, is an interesting way to go about this. And I think on the whole, the card becomes more interesting because as a Morgan Le Fay deck, I don't think it was ever going to really break through. As a support piece in other things, I'm a lot more interested in her. I'm just not sure 3/4 is the exact right space. Swordmaster is getting a point of power. I honestly don't know what else I'm supposed to say about this other than remember when they were like, yeah, 3/6, that'll make Swordmaster do it. Yeah, I don't know. This card could be like a 3/9. That's sort of where I'm at. Swordmaster has only ever seen play when you're using it in like Hella decks to be like, here's a big 3 that is discarding my 7. I need a way to guarantee discard my 7, like that kind of stuff. Or I need a guarantee to discard my 5. Yeah, I'm not seeing it with this card. I still don't see it with this card, and I hope I never do see it, because if it ever does anything, I mean, it's going to be a little bit horrifying. I do like that, you know, we're prepping for Weapon H here, right? We are buffing the card that discards odd cost cards, so it can discard your Weapon H, which is always odd cost because it goes from 7 to 5 to 3 to 1. And then presumably to 0, which Marvel Snap does count as an even cost, but by that point, I don't think you care. Solid buff to Helicarrier, but I think it really does put a microscope, let's say, on especially the 5 and 6 vanilla cost cards. Hulk being 12 power, and then you look at every other 10 or every other 6 cost cards that release, and you're just like, oh yeah, that's just Hulk, but better. It sucks because that's the Hulk. But I think that this is a solid thing to do. Like, in as much as people play Helicarrier, I'm actually probably more familiar with it than most, because a couple of the high elo players that I talk to a lot, Butt and Jimmy Dickens, really love playing these absolute dog water Helicarrier decks. They're not good, but they are fun. And I think that this guy getting some extra power, it's usually pretty meaningful, because one of the things those decks typically try to do is dump stuff out of their hand, you know, Corvus randomly, and then sometimes you'll just be able to Ghost Rider back a very, very large man. That's a pretty solid thing to do. It's not like it's no power. These decks, though, have not been really viable in combo land, which we're currently in. They're decks that are sort of fully devoted to a game plan, but really mostly are looking to feed on mid-range decks when they're able to do so. And I think that is, if a Helicarrier has problems beyond the obvious, that is probably the problem, is like when you put a Helicarrier deck together, it does kind of look like something that's just like meant to feed on mid-range decks, which I don't know if we necessarily have enough of. And even the ones we do have get really good on points. And so it's a little bit riskier as a proposition fundamentally, in a way that 2 points of power just simply probably will not fix. It's Helicarrier. It's nice that it got the points of power. That's it. I've been a bit of a truther about, like, just make Dormammu 20 power, right? Just 20 power Dormammu, 20 power Dormammu. It seems they are dedicated to working their way up there in 1 power increments. I do think Dormammu does a couple of cool things with Weapon X. I'd be a lot more inclined to do those cool things if he was 15 power. And I am more inclined to do them at 13 than 12. No arguments here. But I just sort of think that this guy is already kind of arbitrarily large whenever he comes down. The extra power matters less and less the more of it you give him. Like, what's the difference between 12 and 15? 15 is just a more satisfying outcome when you have to, like, blow up your own hood or whatever. Or, like, that kind of stuff, I think, matters in terms of making the downside on this card a little bit better. The upside on this card has always kind of been the same. Like, you just make it a little bit more lane-winny. But I just kind of think that this card is cool, interesting, solid, and probably won't be legitimately amazing for a while. It's already been around. Like, people play some Dormammu decks in High Infinite. They're not particularly good. They got a lot worse, weirdly, with the debris change, because they could be like these pseudo clog decks where you'd like threaten them with clog and things of that nature, and that actually kept your matchups a lot closer. Now that they're not pseudo clog decks and they have to compete on power, I think this stuff gets a little bit worse, because you're investing a sort of combo level investment in trying to make this deck work, but your output just isn't really big enough, which brings me back to Dormammu should be 20 power or whatever. Like, you know what I think about this. I don't think 13 is a big needle mover. I hope that in 2 months they buff it to 14, and then 2 months from then they buff it to 15, and then we'll finally be there. Saved the best for last. They rescued Spider-Man Noir with this. This is taking Spider-Man Noir to a 4/4, but making its effect always hit the top card of the deck, and then you get the card for free if you meet the conditions. In other words, this is always going to make the top card of your deck 8 power. This card seems really good. There are so many hits by which you are very capable of doing really strong stuff with this card. Honestly, I look at this card and I see downside big America Chavez making your top card 8. Imagine that's a Brood, right? Like, that's awesome. Upside, this card will get you that card for free. Now, this is really probably very strong in Surfer. I would expect to be playing some Spider-Man Noir Surfer. I also expect to get Shadow King'd a lot. So there are some relevant things going on here. Don't get me wrong. But when I look at this card, I see a very strong card. I see what this card should have been probably the whole time. This is a card that is all upside now. It is doing something strong, and then if you meet the condition, that thing is even stronger. I have nothing but good things to say about this card. I think they took a design that was very awkward and weird, and they made it into one that I think really fits Marvel Snap. I don't know how they did it in 2 weeks, because it sort of feels like when I look at this, it's like, really? You just had this in your back pocket? like this is so much better. This is a much better card. This is just way cooler. This is the card that should have released, and here it is now, and it's 2 weeks too late for me to buy that cool-ass variant that I would have gotten if the card wasn't terrible. Give me that variant, Second Dinner. I demand compensation for this. Yeah, I think this card is sick. Now that it's just free-rolling the upside, this is a card that is just genuinely very good most of the time. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. I hope you enjoyed this new OTA. Say goodbye to our move overlords. Say hello to our spider overlords. It's been a pleasure as always. Have a wonderful evening.